Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Strickling, you said you are here to testify in support of freedom. And you said freedom, quote, depends on the network of stakeholders. Now, you and I are both graduates of the Harvard Law School. Somehow, we have survived that.
You better than me, it appears.
The First Amendment, by its terms, applies only to state action, to government action. It binds the federal government, it binds the states, it binds local governments, American governments. The First Amendment does not bind foreign governments. The First Amendment does not bind private corporations. Would you agree with everything I've just said?
Yes, sir.
So, your testimony to this committee is that we should trust these stakeholders, none of whom are bound by the First Amendment, with protecting our rights. And indeed, you cited a number of the global technology companies. In your judgment, do the global technology companies have a strong and impeccable record of protecting free speech online?
Sir, I would like to make two comments in response to that. First off, in your opening remarks, you posited a vision or a scenario of ICANN and the U.S. government's role in it vis-a-vis the First Amendment that just does not comport with the facts.
Sir, I asked you just a simple question. Do the global technology companies have a good record of protecting free speech online?
I would believe that they do a fine job of that, but I'm in no way in position of saying that they've done a perfect job of that. But the comparison here that's important is how will it be different between the existing situation at ICANN and what will be in the future. When you talk about the First Amendment protecting content online, you're talking about website providers who are operating at the second level, third level of the domain name system. NTIA in the Department of Commerce and the U.S. government has no role whatsoever with respect to who gets domain names at the second level or above, what content they put on those websites, and how it is handled internationally. So when you posit that there's some First Amendment protection that exists today, I'm not sure what you're talking about, because when you're talking about website owners, we're not involved in that. So there will be no First Amendment protection from the United States that would extend in any way to protect people operating at that level of the domain name system.
I will say it is remarkable and distressing to see a senior representative of the Obama administration saying you have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to First Amendment protections. Because I'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about, sir. Right now, under the existing arrangement, if ICANN decided to delist a website because it disagreed with the political content, I'm assuming your agency would step in to prevent that.
That's not, you're not positing a realistic scenario. ICANN would be involved
You're
at
saying
the
they
domain,
wouldn't do that. I'm
at the
asking how
top
you
level
would...
domain level. We're talking .com, .net, .web, those sorts of names. We're talking about the names that then other people in the internet ecosystem would then use to develop their own websites. So ICANN would never be involved in the takedown of a second level, third level site, except to the extent that it's involved as part of their contract compliance issues with registrars. But the United States has no role at that point.
You just said they wouldn't do that, except if they did it as part of their contract compliance. But this is all under the context in which they are operating under a contract with the United States government.
It is not. It is not, Senator.
Sir,
that's not correct.
Sir, please do not interrupt me.
I apologize, and I will listen to your question.
In a circumstance where the United States government relinquishes any oversight over this contract, the oversight instead shifts to multinational stakeholders. Now, you testified in response to the question I asked you earlier that you think that the global technology companies have, I think the word you used was a fine record protecting free speech. I will tell you, I for one am not comforted with trusting our freedom to companies with a, quote, fine record, although you said not perfect, and I suspect there's a reason you said not perfect. Because, for example, Microsoft, Facebook, and YouTube, which is owned by Google, all of whom are supporting this transition, signed a code of conduct with the European Union to remove so-called hate speech from European countries in less than 24 hours. That is not what I would call a fine record of protecting free speech, working with governments to take down speech that they disagree with. Likewise, Facebook recently faced serious allegations of censoring speech on its platform to silence conservative voices. And I would note this is not uniform one direction or another. Progressives, leftists, Verizon refused to distribute an optional opt-in text message from NAR Al Pro-Choice America, saying that it does not accept programs from any group, quote, that seeks to promote an agenda or distribute content that, in its discretion, may be seen as controversial or unsavory to any of our users. Now that, I would suggest, is not a fine record of protecting the First Amendment. Now listen, Verizon, Google, Facebook, they're not government entities. They're not bound by the First Amendment. But the United States government is. And for those of us that want the internet to remain free, want to avoid internet censoring, being told that we should trust these stakeholders when their conduct over and over again, indeed, recently, the Journal of Law, Technology, and Policy at the University of Illinois said, quote, prominent American corporations, including Cisco Systems, Microsoft, Nortel Networks, WebSense, and Sun Microsystems, have all played a part in quickly equipping China with censorship equipment. You are asking the American people to trust private companies with control over their free speech and remove the U.S. government role.
I am not, Senator. That is absolutely not correct.
What is incorrect about it?
The United States involvement is only with respect to the IANN functions. That is what we contract with ICANN to perform. That deals at the highest level with the root zone file, meaning top-level domains. This has nothing to do with what choices individual companies make in terms of what they put on their own websites. It has nothing to do with what is happening with the content of what's passing on the internet day by day. We have no role in that. We have no authority over that. All we're suggesting is that that contract in which all we do is verify that changes to the root zone file have been made accurately no longer has a technical reason to exist and no longer has a political reason to exist, because if anything, it's being used by authoritarian governments who do want to control content, who do want to affect what goes over the internet. It gives them the opportunity to argue for that in international venues and attempt to wrest control of the internet away from the multi-stakeholder body that performs these functions today.
You testified before this committee that the American government would remain, I think the term you used was a, quote, forceful advocate.
Yes, sir.
For free speech.
Yes, sir.
That is very much the same language that is used on the NTIA's Q&A document that says the United States, quote, will continue to play an active leadership role in advocating for a free and open internet within ICANN as a member of the Governmental Advisory Committee and in other international venues.
That's correct.
With all due respect, simply being told that we will argue for the First Amendment and try to convince Russia, try to convince China, try to convince Iran the First Amendment's a good idea, within the Governmental Advisory Committee, if this transition goes forward, would the United States government have any greater ability to defend its position than would Russia or China or Iran?
The important point to take away from the Government Advisory Committee is that for it to render advice that has any force with the board, it has to be consensus advice, meaning it has to be advice to which no government objects, which means there will be no advice coming out of the Governmental Advisory Committee that the United States doesn't agree to that requires the board to take any particular action with respect to it. Otherwise, the board can continue to reject GAC advice as they do today.
Just to clarify your answer to the question, if the transition goes forward on the Governmental Advisory Committee, the United States would be on the very same footing as would Russia or Iran or China.
That's correct. But what I'm telling you is that nothing will go forward from the GAC that the United States doesn't agree with.
Very good. We'll continue this questioning. Chairman Grassley.
Mr.